Hello everyone, my name is Marina Lantos and thank you so much for joining our YouTube channel. Today's haircut is going to be creative long pixie. Come on over. All right, so I have my doll head sectioned off in several different zones. So zone is a major section. My first zone is going to be the fringe, and I went from the highest point of the eyebrow to the round of the head, and then I have 4 triangles, and then if you can go around to show those triangles, and they are separating from the top of the head to the top of the ears and going just above the round of the head, which is the bottom of the apex. So the first section that I'm going to do is going to be the fringe area. So I'm going to take a vertical section right in the center of the fringe and establish the length that I'm going to use for the rest of the haircut on these sections that I have sectioned off. So she's got a little bit of a shorter pieces right over here that have already been pre-cut. So I want to make sure that I'm not going any shorter than that. So my over direction is I'm bringing hair exactly where it grows, and my elevation is going to be right from the head shape using these shorter pieces as the guide. As I'm approaching the top of the section, I'm going to lift a little tiny bit higher to make sure that I am not creating the length that's going to be longer on the top. So the length is going to be about the same on the top of the section than it is on the bottom. The reason for it is this fringe will fall really loose, very soft, without being too heavy. Now with each section, I'm going to over direct hair into the previous section. So I'm going to keep my body position stationary, find my guide, here it is, cut right to the guide, cut to my first knuckle, lift the section a little tiny bit higher, find my guide, cut right to it, lift a little bit higher, and then finish the section. Now again, stationary guide, which means I'm over directing here all the way into the first section. So I'm gonna have you come right over here so that you can see the over direction and stand directly in front of my fingers. So then this way you can see that I'm over directing all the way right into the first section. And you want to use mirror as the guide, right? So the mirror is going to be your best friend. It's going to tell you if you're moving the hair a little too far, too high, too low, to the right, to the left. So, and then the last part, whatever reaches, is what I'm going to cut in this section. So right through here. Make sure my lines are staying clean. It's a lot of hair that I'm holding between my fingers, so I want to make sure that I'm combing it really neatly. And then when I drop these sections, you guys can tell that the length on the outside is a little bit longer and the length in the center is shorter. So now I'm going to place my first section back and add more hair from the opposite side. My elevation doesn't change, my over direction does not change. The only thing that's going to change is how I'm combing the hair. So I want to make sure that I'm combing the hair directly into the center of the head. So the first initial section where I cut it is where I'm going to keep my over direction for the whole entire fringe. And the reason why I'm combing the hair away from me, which is the opposite of what I did on the first section, is to make sure that I'm combing it towards the center and not towards me. Lift a little bit higher with each section to make sure that the length is not getting progressively longer. The higher you elevate, the more movement you're going to create and the more hair you are going to be cutting off. All the way into the center. Check with the mirror to make sure, and then until you run out of hair to cut. So here's my fringe. All right, so now the next 2 sections are going to be the 2 triangles that I created right on top of the head. You're going to take center part directly in the mohawk area, so right in the center of the head. You're going to lift this directly up, and then we're going to find the longest piece that's coming from the fringe. So here it is. And again, we're working on base, so which means For each part of subsection that we're cutting, we want to change the elevation so that we are bringing hair exactly where it grows from. That will ensure that the length on top of the section and the bottom is staying the same. Now the elevation is very similar to the elevation that we created in the fringe area. Now we're going to keep our over direction also similar to what we did in the first section. So we're gonna comb the hair where the hair grows from, and then over directed all the way into the first initial section, which is going to be our section 1 in the mohawk area. Take a section, nice and neat, comb it all the way up and right into the center, keeping your sections really clean, fingers mimicking to what your cutting line is telling you to do, and then continue until you run out of hair to cut. So this is going to be my last section, and then on the opposite side I will show you guys my over direction. So I'm going to show you how I'm combing the hair directly into the center. So I'm going to spin the doll head going this way. I'm going to comb that down, and then again take a mohawk section, find my first section on the opposite side because that's going to be the center of the head. So I want to make sure that I always have that initial section so that I know exactly where to comb the hair. So right on top of the head, find your guide. Very important to continue to change your elevation as you're cutting so that the top of the head does not get longer. Now, if you want to alter this haircut and have more of the hair in the back of the head, then you don't have to change your elevation. You can keep your elevation slightly lower, and that's what's going to create more length on top of the head. So this is just one way of doing a haircut. Obviously, there are plenty of options and different ways that you can go about it. And then here's my last section. I'm going to keep checking to make sure that my elevation and my over direction is good, and that I am doing the same thing on the right side as it is on the left side. Okay, so here's my zone 2. I'm going to comb that hair out of the way, and then the last 2 sections that I have on the top are going to be the back of the head. So I'm going to remove that and then use the clips to separate the 2 areas. So now we are working with the round of the head. So now the head shape goes this way, and that's exactly how I'm going to hold my fingers. So I'm going to find the longest piece coming from the top of the head. I'm going to take a mohawk section, hold the longest piece between my fingers, bring it exactly on base, so bring it exactly where the hair grows from. My fingers are going to be mimicking and mirroring what the head shape is doing. So with each individual subsection that I'm cutting, I want to make sure that I'm working on base and my fingers are mirroring what the head shape is doing at that elevation. So here's my last little bit. I'm going to take my next section, which is going to be, again, a vertical section, and I'm going to comb the hair into the previous and into the center. So I always start from the top. So I'm going to comb this hair all the way up, find my guide, change my elevation to make sure that I'm not getting longer, comb it right into the center. Clean work. You always want to make sure that you're seeing very clean guides, and if you're not, recomb it and make sure that you fix it up, because the messier the guide, the messier the work. So I can cross-check and make sure that my zone 2, which was the 2 triangles on the top, is matching up to the area that I'm working with now, right? Because our elevation and over direction stayed the same, which means all of the zones should match up together. I'm gonna cross-check it, make sure everything looks really pretty, and now I can continue on the opposite side. So on this side, I'll show you guys elevation and how, or over direction, and how I'm holding the fingers. So first, I have to find that middle, keeping my sections really clean. Add new hair to the first section, and then comb the hair right into the center. So up first, make sure I'm seeing the guide very clear, and then slightly lower until I run out of hair to cut. Now I'm going to take the rest of the section in one, because I know not much hair is reaching. So I have plenty of control of the section, so I don't have to take tiny, tiny little sections, as long as I could see my guide through that area. And then the last bit, keeping my comb vertical, following the head shape and constantly changing the elevation. Okay. So now that I finished the internal shape, I'm going to blend the 2 lengths together using my feather razor. So first I'm going to start with the longest piece from the fringe area, and then keep the length that we have here. So what I want to create is a solid line that goes from the shortest piece to the longest piece, and then create lots of texture within. I'm going to hold this hair, find my guide, let the guide slide through my fingers, and I'm going to keep the blade really open as I'm sliding through that hair. The reason why I want to keep this very open is I want to create as much texture and as much movement as possible, because I know my client's hair is a little bit on the straighter side, so I want that weight to be removed so that the client can wear her hair a bit more wavier and textured. And removing weight makes hair sort of spring up, and then you can beach wave it a little bit easier and create much more softness. And you guys can tell the difference now, where the hair sits much softer and much freer. So now I'm going to take diagonal section that's going to turn into a vertical section. And then once it turns into a vertical section, I'm going to go all the way around the head, creating length that are going to mirror this length in here and connect the top to the existing length on the bottom. So this haircut is going to be a long pixie or a short bob. I'm going to make sure that I move with each section so that I'm not over directing hair all the way into the center, or I'm sorry, not into the center, all the way towards the front hairline. So I'm just moving my section just a little tiny bit away from where I'm working so that the length doesn't get shorter in the back, and I want this length to be exactly the same. Next section, now I'm going to get more vertical, and then from this point my sections are going to be vertical, going all the way around the head. I'm going to drop the tripod just so that I'm a little bit more comfortable. Lift the hair about parallel to the floor. That doesn't really make that much of a difference, it just makes it a little bit easier for you to see the shape. Find your longest piece so that you know exactly what you are not cutting off. And then melt the 2 lengths together while keeping your blade open. When you're working with a razor, your sections should be a little tiny bit wider to make sure that you have control of the section, right? So with scissors, we keep our sections pretty tight, pretty small, so that we are creating blunt and beautiful lines. With a razor, if the section is really skinny, you're going to cut off the section too fast and won't be able to create movement within the section. I'm going to continue all the way around, keeping my sections vertical until I reach the back of the head. And then I'm going to repeat the same thing on the opposite side. So as I'm taking each section out, I'm always looking for the guide. Now, because the blade is very open, so the amount of movement that I'm creating with the feather razor, how in and out I'm going, is pretty far apart, which means I'm not creating any hard lines. So if there are no hard lines, that guide is going to be much harder to see. So always look for the length that's going to be the longest length coming from the top, and then measure up and find your longest piece around the hairline and place your fingers, so here's my length, and place your fingertips pointing towards that overall length. Very open, over directing hair just a tiny bit away from the base, away from the right side of the section, all the way. If I feel like any of the areas are still a little too heavy, I go through and then check them. I have a couple more sections left, and I always want to end up with a center back section that's going to divide the right side and the left side. Head shape, I'm paying attention to client's head shape, making sure their head is straight so that I know the shape that I'm creating is true. And if she looks down, while I keep my fingers the same, it might get me a little bit in trouble with the shape that is no longer going to be honest. And then the last piece is going to be right in the center. Checking my lengths, making sure that I'm always following the same guide. And now I'm out of the hair to cut. So now I'm gonna do the same thing on the opposite side. And the last bit of this haircut is going to be skimming some of the length on the bottom, just to make it a little bit more of the prettier length, a little bit more flattering. So combine the hair neatly. I'm gonna hold my fingers all the way towards the bottom of the section, and then I'm gonna use a skimming technique, which is going to remove weight and length at the same time, still keeping the length below the hairline so that it's not too strong of a shape, still has a little bit of softness in it. And if you guys look from the side, look at the difference, right? So same length, same shape. This is a little more head hugging, And look how soft and beautiful that sits. And this is just a little too long. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to make sure that I'm working around the head so that I'm not creating more length in the front. So separate that. Combine the hair, make sure it's really clean. Hold my fingers just below the guide and then a couple of inches above. Skim the length and the weight until we get to the overall length. I have a couple more sections on this side. I'm being very cautious around the hairline. I know the section is going to be much skinnier because the hairline goes up. So I want to skim a little bit less to make sure that I don't create too much of a hole. Now I want a little bit of that unevenness that comes from the natural hairline because I don't want this to look like a bob, but I still want to make sure that I don't create too much of a disconnection between the length in the front as it is in the back. So now comb the last bits in here. So right in here, I already took out plenty of weight. So all I'm gonna do is just remove the length. And then here it is. So I'll be using a paddle mason brush and then some hair resort to blow dry this hair first straight, and then we're gonna add some texture. Thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this haircut. And please check out all of the other videos that we have on our YouTube channel. And here's the end result.